Hello and welcome to another video discussion series. And for this series, we will be discussing intermolecular forces of attraction. So in our previous discussion, we learned that bonding forces or the intramolecular forces are due to the attraction between cations and anions for ionic bonding, between nuclei and electron pairs for covalent bonding, or between metal cations and the localized electrons for metallic bonding. But for this discussion, we will be finding out that the physical nature of the phases and their changes are due primarily to the intermolecular forces or the non-bonding forces. So we will discuss more of this as we go through our presentation, and we will discuss the following concepts: the intermolecular forces, the liquid state, the solid state, and the phase changes. For the intermolecular forces, we have to differentiate it first with what we call the intramolecular forces, or the concept that we discussed last time. When we say intramolecular forces or bonding forces, they are found within a molecule. Take note, within a molecule. So the chemical behavior of each phase of matter is the same because the same basic particle is present in each case. For example, water molecules are present whether the substance is in the solid, liquid, or gas phase. Now, when we say intermolecular forces or non-bonding forces, they are found between the molecules. That's why the physical behavior of each phase of matter is different because the strength of these forces differs from state to state. Now, I am showing you an illustration on the things that we discussed last time, or the intramolecular forces. Again, these are the force of attraction within a molecule. So we have discussed this last time: ionic bonding, we also have covalent bonding, and metallic bonding. Now, for the intermolecular forces, we have here several types of non-bonding forces. But for this lesson, we will just be discussing three, which should be the hydrogen bond, the dipole-dipole interactions, and the London dispersion forces. So just to reiterate, intermolecular forces are the attractive forces that exist between the molecules. So if we will be arranging the three types we will be discussing according to increasing strength, we have the first one, which is the London dispersion forces. This is the weakest intermolecular force. And then we have the dipole-dipole interaction. And then lastly, the strongest out of the three would be hydrogen bonding. For the first one, which would be the London dispersion forces. So London dispersion forces are very weak interactions due to momentary changes in electron density in a molecule. So take note that the London dispersion forces is because of the change in electron density that creates a temporary dipole. Now, this temporary dipole will cause a weak interaction between them that constitutes the London dispersion forces. And we have to remember that all covalent compounds exhibit London dispersion forces. So these intermolecular forces are the only intermolecular forces present in nonpolar compounds. Again, these intermolecular forces are the only intermolecular forces present in nonpolar compounds. The strength of these forces is also related to the size of the molecule. That's why the larger the molecule, the larger the attractive force between molecules, and the stronger the intermolecular forces. In here, we have an illustration showing the London dispersion force between two CH4 molecules. So in this illustration, a temporary dipole in one CH4 molecule induces a temporary dipole in another CH4 molecule with the partial positive charge and negative charge arranged close to each other. Again, the weak interaction between this temporary dipole will constitute the London dispersion forces. Now, for the dipole-dipole interactions, So these are the attractive forces between permanent dipoles of two polar molecules. So if you recall from our previous slide, the London dispersion forces are also the only intermolecular forces that occur in non-polar molecules. Now, for dipole-dipole interaction, these are attractive forces between two polar molecules. So, for example, we have here a formaldehyde molecule. So, the carbon-oxygen bond in this molecule is polar because oxygen is more electronegative than carbon. So, this polar bond gives formaldehyde a permanent dipole, making it a polar molecule. Now, if we have here three formaldehyde molecules, the dipoles in adjacent formaldehyde molecules can align so that the partial positive and the partial negative charges are close to each other. So these attractive forces due to permanent dipoles are much stronger than the London dispersion forces. And then for the last one, we have hydrogen bonding. Hydrogen bonding occurs when a hydrogen atom bonded to oxygen, nitrogen, or fluorine is electrostatically attracted to an oxygen, nitrogen, or fluorine atom in another molecule. So hydrogen bonding is only possible between two molecules that contain a hydrogen atom bonded to a very electronegative atom, which can be oxygen, nitrogen, or fluorine. So for our example here, we have two water molecules which can hydrogen bond to each other. So a hydrogen atom is covalently bonded to oxygen in one water molecule, and this molecule is bonded to another oxygen in another water molecule. So hydrogen bonds are the strongest of the three types of intermolecular forces. And we have to remember that hydrogen bonding is important as well in many biological molecules including proteins and DNA. DNA, which is contained in the chromosomes of the nucleus of a cell, and it is responsible for the storage of all genetic information. Now, DNA is composed of two long strands in here in the illustration, and these strands are held together by hydrogen bonding as shown in this illustration. So let's work on some examples. So in this example, we have to determine which of the following substances exhibit hydrogen bonding. So for any that do, draw hydrogen bonds between two of its molecules. So we have these following compounds. For our plan to solve this problem, we have to determine if the molecule does not contain nitrogen, oxygen, or fluorine. Therefore, it cannot form hydrogen bonds. Now, if it contains any of these atoms covalently bonded to hydrogen, we draw two molecules in this pattern. So for the first example, C2H6, as we can see there, it has no nitrogen, oxygen, or fluorine atoms, so no hydrogen bonds can form. Now, for the second example, this compound contains covalent bond between oxygen and hydrogen, so it can form hydrogen bonds between its molecule. That's why it exhibits hydrogen bonding. Now, for our last example in here, it can form hydrogen bonds at two sides. So, hydrogen bond between a hydrogen bonded to nitrogen and the oxygen atom, or they can form two such hydrogen bonds. So, a third possibility could be between a hydrogen attached to nitrogen in one molecule and the lone pair of nitrogen in another molecule. So we just show you here the first possible way wherein we can form hydrogen bonds. So you have here the first possible way wherein a hydrogen bonded to nitrogen can bond to an oxygen of another molecule, and then here you have here the hydrogen bond between hydrogen and oxygen, which is bonded to another nitrogen, and then you also have here another hydrogen molecule which will hydrogen bond with an oxygen, since this hydrogen is bonded to a nitrogen atom. So here is a summary of the different types of intermolecular forces wherein it is arranged from the weakest to the strongest. Again, the weakest intermolecular force would be the London dispersion forces, wherein it is exhibited by all molecules including non-polar molecules. And then for the dipole-dipole interaction, it has a moderate strength and is exhibited by molecules with a net dipole or the polar molecules. And then hydrogen bonding is the strongest of the three. So it is exhibited by molecules with an oxygen-hydrogen bond, a nitrogen-hydrogen bond, or a hydrogen-fluorine bond. And that's it for our first video in the discussion series. Thank you for listening.